in a class that honestly is not that particularly strong when it comes to pure 3-4 edge rushers. Teams are going to be desperately looking for those type of guys because they saw the impact of a Von Miller and a DeMarcus Ware for the Denver Broncos in the playoffs, in particular Super Bowl 50. A lot of NFL teams run the 3-4. You can never have enough of these explosive edge rushers. And in a draft like this that is lacking in them, those guys that have that explosiveness off of the edge are going to be in great demand and are going to see their draft stock perhaps artificially rise as a result. And somebody that will fit into that category, I guarantee it, for this 2016 NFL draft, easy for me to say, just like Goodell saying Marcus Mariota, is Kamalei Correa, the edge rusher from Boise State. 6'3", 240, 245 pounds, a junior off of that very good and playmaking Boise State defense this past year. You look at him, he's one, and like I said, in a class that lacks explosive edge rushers, he's one of those guys that actually fits into that profile of being explosive off the edge. And where it really starts to him in terms of the strengths of his game are his quickness and his speed, in particular his quickness and burst. This is a guy that is very explosive in a short area. This is a guy that can get going quickly, and he can be a force off of the edge. A guy with, I think, underrated speed. He's not a burner, but he has enough speed and overall athleticism, in my opinion, to be able to stick outside as a 3-4 edge rusher or maybe as a 4-3 sandbacker. Because, you look at a guy like him, he's only 240, 245 pounds. You really don't want to profile him as a 4-3 defensive end. You don't really view him as a 3-4 inside linebacker or a 4-3 middle linebacker because I don't know that he has the instincts to play that type of role. So he needs to be an edge rusher. He needs to be an edge rusher that wins with explosiveness and overall athleticism, and I think he's got it. I've seen some people question his hip flexibility and his lateral agility, particularly when it comes to coverage, and I gotta say, I think he's got enough. The overall package is there, and especially that quick burst and explosiveness is most certainly there as much as it is for any edge rusher in this entire 2016 NFL draft. And one thing he does really well, I think, that goes hand in hand with that quickness that can really make him a force off of the edge is that ability to anticipate the snap and read the snap and read the snap count, anticipate that snap count, and get off the ball. So often that can be where the battle is won before the offensive tackles even lay their hands on you. If you can get off quickly and you can get to your spot before the lineman can get to their spot or get you to their spot, that's half the battle and you've won that. And the past 2 years at Boise State, Correa, in particular in 2015, consistently demonstrated to me that ability to do just that. And I really like his ability to get the edge in a 5 to 7 yard window. Like I've talked about with other defensive ends and other edge rushers in this class, one thing that's been a theme and a concern for me about a lot of these guys is that when they do get around the corner and they do get off the edge, when they get to where the quarterback would be, they're 8, 9, 10 yards past the line of scrimmage. And you just don't have that many quarterbacks that drop that far back. The average quarterback is going to be 5 to 7 yards back. So you want an edge rusher as much as possible that can get to the quarterback off of the edge in that 3-yard window. And Correa can do just that, as well as, in my opinion, anybody in this entire 2016 draft class. I also like the motor, the effort, the hustle that he plays with. I feel like this is a guy that plays hard, both in terms of his pass rush motor, his desire to play and run support, his desire to go after somebody in pursuit. I like those guys that have athleticism, but also have that will and desire to go with that skill, that will to want it, that will to play hard, the will to go make plays happen. And Correa strikes me as a guy that can do just that. And for a guy of 240, 245 pounds, an underrated trait of his game, I think, is ability to maintain, contain, and to set the edge. I was actually surprised how well he was able to anchor and set the edge being 240, 245 pounds, especially with not a lot of great natural strength. And I think that in part comes to that explosiveness, but also because to that desire and to that motor that he plays with on a consistent basis. He's not somebody that I fear is going to get completely, pancaked and bowled over consistently on the edge. He can actually hold up on the edge better than you might think. But in terms of concerns for him, and why I'm not maybe rating him higher than where I ultimately will. Length. 6'3", doesn't have the longest arms. I'm not saying he's too short to play outside as a 3-4 edge backer. That's most certainly not the case, but you would ideally like somebody maybe 6'5", 6'6", if they had that athletic package. The longer the better, I guess you would say. A strength. And here's a guy that at times, like I said, especially when it came to anchoring at the point of attack, had good functional playing strength, but here's a guy that you would like to see get stronger. Definitely would like to see get stronger because he's never going to be a massive dude at 240, 245 pounds. So you'd like to see him carry that weight better and put more muscle on him and get more strength because he's going to need that strength. He's not going to be able to blow by every single offensive tackle just with one outside pass rush, and that's it. He's not going to be able to beat everybody with just quickness. He's going to have to get to stronger. The biggest concern in terms of technique that I have for him, and I have a few technique concerns, ultimately comes down to his hand usage. It's very spotty, inconsistent, and when he does use them, he's not very good at it. Not a lot of pass rush technique there, so it gives me some concerns about his ability to shed blockers. Like I said, he plays hard, and he plays stronger than he actually is, but this is a guy that I could have some concerns about, that if he can't get outside and he tries to go in, he has no bull rush. He doesn't have counter moves, so he might struggle to get off the blockers. And that lack of pass rush moves, again, for a guy that's going to be that quick and that explosive off the edge, you'd like to see him have better double moves, better counter moves, better rip moves and swim moves, and a spin move in particular. And he really doesn't have any of that refined. He really doesn't have any of that he can really go to as like a pass rush move, other than just flying off of the edge and hoping that he gets there. Another question I have about him is in coverage. I think he'd be adequate in zone coverage. Like I said, I don't think his awareness or instincts are all that incredible, so there might be times where he would lose sight of where he actually was supposed to be in his responsibility in zone. In terms of man coverage, I don't know if I'd want to take Correa and put him out on a tight end or put him out on a running back and ask him to go man up and defend the guy for 15 or 20 yards. That's not the strength of his game, and that's not where he's really going to be best served at the NFL level. And I have some concerns about his footwork and somewhat about his hip flexibility. Like I said, as an edge rusher, I think he's got enough hip flexibility and lateral agility. But in terms of coverage, I don't really know. When I look at an NFL comparison for Correa, the first name that jumped out to me was Robert Mathis because he was explosive off the edge, athletic enough to play in space, questionable size, to play defensive end in a 4-3, even though Mathis, again, was about the same size and made it for years playing in the cover 2 that Indy was playing. Both of them try-hard, effort type of guys. It's about quickness and speed more than it is about length and strength, and guys that can really struggle to hold their ground in the running game and make an impact in the running game. But as I watched Correa more and more, I said the guy that he really reminded me of, honestly, was Clay Matthews. We think about Clay Matthews and the beast he's become at the NFL level, but we forget he was the third man in a 3-man linebacking crew at USC back in the day. It was about Ray Maualuga, and it was about Brian Cushing, and then there was Clay Matthews. And then as the draft process went along, Maualuga's buzz died down a little bit. Cushing was the guy, but then you were talking about Clay Matthews, a guy who was there for 4 or 5 years, finally was starting to piece it together, but he could get off of the edge, and he was very explosive off the edge, but he wasn't very refined as a pass rusher. He needed to get stronger, which Clay Matthews was able to do that. And all joking aside, though, when I watched Correa on film, the more I watched him, the more he reminded me of Clay Matthews coming out of USC. 2 guys with great quickness and explosiveness and straight-ahead speed that were able to anticipate the count, get that edge in a 5 to 7 yard window, played hard, set the edge surprisingly well for guys that were only 240, 245 pounds, but needed to get stronger, need to get better at shedding blocks and utilizing their hands, need refinement in terms of their pass rush technique, and maybe not the best in coverage. Guys with a lot of upside, but they were going to take some work, and they needed to be in the right situation. Well, Clay Matthews got that work in, put that work in, and he's become one of the best linebackers in the National Football League. And I do think that there's that potential upside there with Correa because I see it. Yes, I have some pauses in terms of some of his technique concerns, but in a draft, again, that is lacking in explosive edge rushers at that, Correa is one of the few, and in my opinion, the most explosive of the edge rushers in the 2016 NFL draft. Here is a guy that give him time, put him in the right situation, and allow him to primarily just be a straight ahead player, at least early on in his career. Here's a guy that I think will validate being a first round pick, which is what I ultimately expect him to be. Now, me personally, from a pure grading standpoint, I grade Correa as an early round 2 pick. I do. But in this draft, he needs to be a first round pick. In fact, at the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being a top 20 pick and going ahead of Noah Spence. Because frankly, I think he's more explosive off the edge and he doesn't have nearly the off the field baggage and trust concerns and issues that a Noah Spence does. And with Correa, you see what he was already able to do in Boise State and how productive he could be. And then he has so much work that is still needed on his game. I think his ceiling, his overall upside is as big as any edge rushers in this draft, up to and including Leonard Floyd. So to me, he should be a top 20 pick in this draft, somewhere between 20 to 30 for sure. If Correa makes it out of round 1, I will be stunned. And it will again be another indictment on how bad many of these NFL front offices and scouting departments and general managers ultimately are at their jobs. For so many teams that are in desperate need of impact edge rushers, here's one of the few guys that in this draft that has the potential to be just that. And like I said, when all is said and done, I expect his draft stock to continue to rise, and I think he will end up going higher than a lot of people have initially anticipated him to. And like I said, I wouldn't rule it out that he ends up going somewhere in the top 20. I think somewhere between 20 to 30 is more likely. But shit, when it comes to the draft, it only takes one team, and crazier things have happened. And I won't even bat an eye that much if somebody took him at like pick 18, pick 19, pick 20. Because I think his upside is that good. I think this guy could produce at a similar level to Clay Matthews at the NFL level.